Hello and welcome to the Africa Hour, the show where we dedicate time and expertise to one policy issue in one African country, looking at it from different perspectives. I am Olumide Abimbola. This season, we are focusing on Africa's growing tech ecosystem. And today, we're in Cameroon, the Central African country with access to the Atlantic Ocean and to the 5 submarine fiber optic cables stationed there, but which surprisingly has some of the biggest issues with internet connectivity and affordability on the continent. Only about 21% of Cameroonians can access the internet. That's largely because getting online is expensive. The country is ranked 114th in the world in terms of internet affordability. This issue is worsening a digital divide in a country where, according to the World Bank Group, nearly half the population lives below the poverty line of low to middle income countries. Yes, high internet costs are a problem across Africa, and African countries remain some of the most expensive data countries in the world. But while internet connections are just expensive in most countries, in Cameroon they are both expensive and of bad quality, and this is infuriating for many consumers. So, what does this mean for the country's development, and how does it impact everyday persons? And importantly, how can authorities level up? I am talking to 3 experts very close to this topic. That's in a minute. Picture this. It's a weekday in April, just another day in Cameroon. But no one is making a call or using their phone to access the internet. In fact, most people have their phones on flight mode.
Mode avion, ce lundi 24 avril 2023, le respect de mise chez certains citoyens de la ville de Yaoundé.
It's because thousands of people are protesting against mobile telecom networks in the country. Those protests were so significant that the authorities had to respond with heavy action against the network operators. So why are Cameroonians so angry with their mobile networks, and how can policymakers fix the problem? I'm chatting with Aminde Blaise Atabong, an investigative freelance journalist based in Yaoundé. Hello, Aminde.
Hi, Olomide. It's nice to be on the show.
I'm also talking to Judith Murungi, a prolific digital researcher currently working on AI regulation, an advocate of the Kenya High Court, and an affiliate of the NGO Internet Sans Frontières, Internet Without Borders. Hi, Judith.
Thank you so much for having me on this episode.
Finally, Caitlin Ndomo is also joining us from Yaoundé. Caitlin is a digital rights advocate and a 2018 fellow with the Open Internet for Democracy initiative. Hi, Caitlin.
Hey, Olumide. I hope you're good.
Aminde, I want to start with you. You've covered everything that's been happening with the internet in Cameroon, and you were at the forefront of the recent protest against internet service providers. Help us set the stage. What exactly led to people refusing to make calls, and how did the protest unfold?
Exactly. The protest, which happened in April, was about the poor quality of network services. Actually, most of the users were protesting against prolonged network disruptions, which often affects calls and internet. As users, you realize that most of the times the connection is slow, it's shaky, or it's either unavailable. And despite that, the mobile network operators will still charge you for maybe if you activate a certain bundle that has to last for 24 hours. And when the connection is slow, you can't actually use the bundle, and after 24 hours, the connection expires, or the bundle expires without you actually making good use of it. So most of the users were angry, and those complaints date back to 2021, where many users have been making complaints to the regulator. So on April 24, many users were called upon to actually go on flight mode between midday, that's 12 p.m., and 2 p.m. for 2 hours. That's daily, in order to penalize the network operators. And you can imagine the financial losses which the mobile network operators incurred during that period. Online, many people were using the hashtag mode avion 237. 237 is the international code for Cameroon.
Right.
So many people were using that hashtag online to express their dissent about, their discomfort about that. The protest was really impactful because just one day after the protest started, the Minister of Post and Telecommunications actually did summon executives of the mobile network operators in the country for a crisis meeting in the capital, Yaoundé. The operators at that time, they pledged that they were going to refund unused or lost data in the event of network unavailability. But actually, things really didn't improve because users kept on seeing how the quality of service was degrading. And then in July, the telecoms regulator actually did fine the mobile network operators. For instance, Orange Cameroon was given a fine of about $3.6 million.
Okay.
But up to now, we see still some hitches. I, as a user personally, I bought a bundle which cost me 2,099 francs for 4.2 gig of data. And actually, I didn't use that data for long, and the data actually did finish. And when it finished, I wasn't notified by my operator. My operator had to now move into my call airtime and then deducted from there until all my call airtime was finished. So it's a problem which is still existing.
That sounds really serious, and I can imagine that it's frustrating for users. It seems to me that the internet service providers are just not up to the task. But help us understand the landscape in Cameroon. Who are the providers, who are the regulators, and what's the level of infrastructure available in Cameroon?
Okay, let me begin with the players in the market. First of all, we have the Ministry of Post and Telecommunications, which is like the overall boss of the telecoms market in Cameroon. And then we have the regulator, known as the Telecommunications Regulatory Board. It's better known by its French abbreviation, ART. Then we have the state-run Cameroon Telecommunications, Camtel. We equally have MTN Cameroon, which is a subsidiary of the NTM Group. We have Orange Cameroon, and then we have Viettel Cameroon, which operates the brand Nextel.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to infrastructure, the Cameroon Telecommunications Camtel, which is a state-run company, actually has monopoly over the national fiber optic backbone, which is about 20,000 kilometers across the country.
Okay.
They equally manage the submarine cable systems. We have the South Atlantic Interlink, which connects Cameroon to Brazil. We have the West Africa cable system. We have the South Atlantic West Africa submarine cable, that's SAT3. We have Nigeria Cameroon submarine cable system and the Africa coast to Europe. So that's the infrastructure in place. And one other key player, which is not actually a provider, but which is very instrumental in the market in Cameroon, is Chinese Huawei, because they actually build and maintain most of the infrastructures that these companies have, like Camtel. Camtel has monopoly over the optic fiber, so the other companies actually have to get optic fiber from Camtel. So they have arrangements which they actually do. But despite these infrastructure, realize that there are so many problems which is impacting on the quality of service. The lack of electricity is a very big problem. There are always frequent power cuts, and when there are frequent power cuts, transmission sites are always down. Another aspect which is also impacting is vandalism. Most of the times, these network installations are always vandalized, especially within the urban cities. The infrastructures are vandalized. In the restive northwest and southwest region, where a prolonged crisis has been ongoing there, you realize that most of the separatist fighters, in the course of the fighting, most of the installations have been damaged. In 2019, the Cameroon Employers Union actually did a study. And out of that study, we realized that of the 618 antennas and transmission sites, which were in the northwest and southwest regions, 114 were fully or partially destroyed as of July 2018. So that has actually impacted service in this region, coupled to the internet cuts, which was registered at the onset of the crisis. Another thing too, which also impacts on the service, is maintenance work, construction work as well as maintenance. In the course of that, at times, companies don't really take the time to displace these optic fiber lines and other telecoms installations. So in the course of that, there's actually optic fiber cuts which impact on service. So in 2022, last year, the companies actually registered about 1,800 fiber cuts. So those are some of the things which are impacting on the quality of service which these operators give to users in Cameroon.
As you were speaking, I had my Nigerian cap on, and I could not help but notice how much of the situation you described in Cameroon is also facing Nigeria. I think the only real exception is that Nigeria does not have any one provider monopolizing access to optic fibers, so it's completely privatized, and that has really helped to develop the sector. And speaking of development, Kathleen, you're a democracy and digital development advocate, and you've spoken out strongly against internet shutdowns in Cameroon. I know that's not the topic we're focusing on today because it's a whole different episode. But in one of your articles, you write that internet shutdowns in Cameroon had a huge effect on the economy. And I cannot help but draw parallels between what Aminde was just talking about and the effects of shutdowns. Would you agree that both have the same effect in the end?
That's a great question, Olumide. And before I even answer it, let me just give a little bit of context. The overarching issue that we have, especially in a Cameroon context, and maybe in a general African context, is just basically governance related. Governance from a public service perspective and governance from a private sector perspective, which is causing us the plethora of socioeconomic problems that we are facing since Cameroon, actually adopted internet in 1997, right? So 1997 till today, we're still talking about the same issues: infrastructure, cost, access, affordability, and all this. Earlier this morning, I was listening to a show, and one of the things that struck me, one of the speakers said that, development is a fundamental right, right? We've spoken about, as advocates, we've spoken about how internet access is a fundamental right. But in a general sense, development itself, it's a fundamental right. That is not the preserve of just specific nations. And we need to begin to, as Africans, as Cameroonians, have the consciousness that we are entitled to development. And these internet issues we are having are a factor of underdevelopment, lack of development, and just lack of political will. To answer your question then, both internet shutdowns and poor internet services have a significant economic ramification on populations. Of course, they operate in different and distinct ways. In the context of shutdowns, Cameroon's experience has demonstrated that there is a severe impact that it can have on the economy. During these kind of events, crucial sectors like e-commerce, online education, digital businesses, they are all brought to a halt, resulting in significant revenue loss and disruptions to economic activities. Even the mindset of the average citizen or resident is affected. It affects mental health, and it sounds funny, Olumide, but let me just explain. You parade yourself with 3-4 different Wi-Fi's or boxes, from different internet service providers because you have developed a complete lack of trust in service providers. So the ramifications are far-reaching. Now, poor internet services, while it's not as drastic as shutdowns, right, it can hinder, like I said before, economic growth and innovation. For example, Cameroon has the Digital Economic Plan 2020, right? And we are in 2023, 3 years later. We are unable to actually meet the objectives of the National Digital Plan simply because of these issues that Aminde has explained before. Also, Cameroon's growing digital economy and the startup ecosystem as a private sector, which should be the backbone of any economy in any country, has faced setbacks due to unreliable internet connectivity, not just shutdowns, but unreliable internet connectivity. So in comparing the two, it's important to note that while poor service doesn't completely halt activities, it leads to, one, an inefficiency, decreased productivity. You go to an office and you cannot have, your bill printed because, for example, you want to send money. Think about remittances, right? Even if it's whether domestic remittances or international remittances. Somebody is dying somewhere and you cannot send money because La connexion ne passe pas, as we say here. We don't have connectivity. And then it leads to missed opportunities. Children who have scholarships and want to go to school, conferences, things like this. Additionally, there's an essential difference in shutdowns. The lack of access is often a deliberate act by authorities, right?
Right.
While poor service arises from all these limitations and technical issues that my brother has mentioned. And then lastly, I just wanted to say regarding the recent state of Cameroon's internet speed. So let's not even start comparing Cameroon's internet speed with the speed, in neighboring countries. We are really down the ranking. So it limits the country's ability to participate fully in its own digital economy and the global digital economy, and to engage in activities efficiently. So I don't want to go back into the factors that contribute to the repeated disruptions, but I want to say that the disruptions are too frequent that they have become worrisome and they've become problematic.
Kathleen, you've helped to lay down how poor internet connectivity is affecting the economy and even people's mental health. I wonder how it's also affecting people's ability to participate in the democratic process. What do you think?
It's hard to separate people's lives and their livelihoods from the ecosystem of digital technology. Slow and expensive, disruptive internet undoubtedly hampers Cameroon's democratic process and restricts citizens and civil society participation in several significant ways. In a digitally interconnected world, access to information and online platforms play a pivotal role in enabling citizens to engage meaningfully with one another, with their community, and with their country's governance. After all, it is government for the people, by the people, with the people. Now, if you look at how we've approached some of our issues in recent times, they mentioned it before. We've had issues with disruption. We have immediately used the internet because this is the most democratic, distributed platform for civic engagement. It's almost like a fourth industrial revolution for advocates. And so a lot of people, especially young people, Cameroon is also one of those countries with a young population, use the internet in different ways, or at least use digital technology. A lot of people have come to understand that if I want to do business, I must be digitally connected. If I want to grow, I must be digital. If I need to connect with family, I have to be. And so we're addressing even our grievances as advocates using that platform because we are more protected. It is easier for us to speak. We don't have to be on the streets. The older you become as an advocate, the less you want to be running around, all of these things. Right. So the flight mode protest, of course, we used digital technology to speak out. This is a country that says, hey, I have a 2020, digital economic plan. But guess what? I also am going to stifle you from implementing the same plan, right? So we're using our voices to engage in meaningful ways, and we're engaging multi-stakeholders. Citizens are showing that they are willing to take action to demand better policies and services from everybody using these platforms. The effects, therefore, of slow and expensive internet on protest are very profound. It's encouraging to witness citizens express their concern through online activism. And like I said, it's effective. But it is also important to note that if we keep having such disruptions, they can dilute the impact of speaking out and speaking up and impede the mobilization of a broader audience. Furthermore, the digital divide exacerbated by slow and expensive internet disproportionately affects marginalized communities. Deeply existing inequalities. You already have inequalities, with women. You have inequalities with hard to reach communities where we don't even yet have the infrastructure. You have inequalities with cost and affordability. You have inequalities with literacy. And then you now have throttled, disrupted, slow internet because of vandalism, security, insecurity, and stuff like that. It will deepen the existing inequalities. In a divided country like Cameroon, where regional disparities are evident, the availability of reliable internet is very, very critical. Lack of access to quality internet can lead to an information gap. It can make it challenging for citizens from different regions to stay informed, to engage in national conversations they must be a part of. Another crucial consideration is the looming threat of consistent shutdowns. Then citizens will be reluctant to heavily invest their time, their efforts in anything regarding the office of the citizens, civic engagement, if they feel that, look, there will be no internet. I can't even use my phone. They will even disrupt the thing. Or the wax cable, as the telcos keep announcing, was cut. Or some rats ate the cable somewhere in Douala. Yes, this is true. And then all efforts that civil society and even other stakeholders are putting together will be rendered futile. So it's really important for us to look at how we address these challenges and have concerted efforts to invest more in different approaches that will give us long-lasting solutions.
Thank you for that, Kathleen. I can add more to the list. I mean, we've been going to different countries, and the last one was in Rwanda, where we talked about delivery of government services through the internet. I mean, I can imagine how difficult that must be if Cameroon wanted to implement that. Judith, thanks for your patience. We didn't forget you. You research digital governance on the continent, so I want you to put things in a wider context for us. But before that, before we leave Cameroon, I want to ask about the peculiar case of Cameroon, where the regulators are essentially on the same side as one of the operators. How does this kind of arrangement affect effectiveness of regulators who are supposed to actually protect consumers?
There is a very limited choice for the consumers when it comes to which people are operating internet, who is the service provider. In a country where you find that the government has not opened that up to any private sector coming in to take up this issue of helping out with the internet, you'd find that there's a monopoly, like we are seeing right now in Cameroon. And then when there is monopoly, then the consumers are extremely at the mercy of whoever has the service. The lack of competition has been linked to the high cost of internet across African countries because there is no competition. That also now affects the degree of quality, the speed of the internet, because there's no competition. So whatever bare minimum can be offered, it will have to be taken out of the need. So there's a need to ensure that there's an opening up of the market so that we can have a bit of diversity, because at least that will hold them accountable in trying to know that if they do not offer the best service will be identified and people will be inclined to it and they'll leave this. But when there's no option, then they're barely at the mercy of whoever is doing it. There's a need for policies that are really putting the consumer at the center so that it's clear how people can speak about these issues and have channels for redress. And when the government now sides with this one service provider, then it's very difficult to get a way out because they'll definitely not be heard and it will just continue to be that cycle.
Cameroon is not the only country where prices are high and where quality is low. In fact, our research shows that parts of Africa have the most expensive data costs in the world, right? Even though North Africa, which is also part of Africa, is probably the cheapest region globally. Which countries have the most extreme prices from your own research, and what's the collective implication of that kind of costly data on a country's development?
Of course, there's research that will identify which countries are having high costs of internet. and those that are having low costs of internet. And if we are to look at the statistics from Statistica, you would find that Africa has countries with both low internet costs and those with very high costs. And you would find them mention Sao Tome and Principe that has about 29 US dollars, and that's like the cost per GB, and Botswana 15 US dollars, and then looking at Togo, which is at 12. But I was also looking at other statistics that were just keen to show that in 2022, the average cost of 1 gigabyte of mobile internet in sub-Saharan Africa amounted to 4.47 US dollars. And still, overall, that shows that Africa still has a very high cost for internet. So when we look at statistics and what they say, it would be easy for you to say, oh, internet in Algeria is cheaper. Or if we look at the East African region, and then we would say Uganda has the highest internet cost if you compare it with Kenya and Tanzania. But now the question would be, what's the driving force behind this? The key issue in terms of accessibility to the internet, also people being able to pay or afford the internet, is very broad, because I believe even in that country, which we will by statistics say has the lowest internet cost in Africa, you would still find people even in that same jurisdiction who are unable to afford the internet at the rate that is classified the lowest in the African continent. So it's a very tricky thing to answer, but that just calls us now to question, do we need a bare minimum average cost for internet across Africa? So the effect of this on a country is very diverse, and the colleagues on this session have been touching on issues here and there. If education is now online, especially post the pandemic or even during the pandemic, then you realize that now schools were going online, universities were going online, and students still didn't have access to the internet. And there are also now areas that have not been even connected to the internet remotely. So that now causes a group of people to be left out. And then there's also been another issue in terms of accessing healthcare. Right now, the African continent is trying to shift towards having telehealth, delivery of health services online. But these services cannot be accessed when we are still talking about the lack of access to the internet. So much as we are speaking about moving forward, I feel like we're still being dragged back, because what's the essence of saying that we are now going digital? Governments to say that if you want to apply for a passport, if you want to get this and that, we are going the e-way. But the question is, how accessible is this internet? How affordable is it? And how effective is it? Because now even those that access it are now complaining about issues like slow speed or the internet being off. So it's a bit of a challenge while we're trying to digitize everything, and yet accessibility is still something that is very questionable.
Hey, if you're enjoying this episode, you definitely should check out other episodes of the Africa Hour. We've spoken to lawyers suing Twitter in Ghana, and we've analyzed why digital ID cards in Rwanda might be problematic, and much more. You'll find us on Spotify, Apple, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. As we do in every episode, we went to the streets, this time to Yaoundé, to hear exactly what the everyday internet situation is like there.
My name is Payo Sayeni. I'm a businessman in Yaoundé. The mobile telephone network MTN, recently it has been somehow disturbing with network problem. I don't know what is really happening with the network issue, because there are some zones when you're there, they call you, they say they have been trying to reach you to no avail. Meanwhile, your phone is on, you didn't even receive a call. And after some time, what you see is a message that this one has been trying to reach you, and then your number was not going through, of which your number was going through. They give different data bundles that we use. Well, at least we go in for the cheaper ones. You activate 1,000 francs, they give you 2.2 gigabytes for 30 days. I'm a businessman, it's difficult. What if my phone is off and I have to make calls in order to get money? I think the issue should be addressed.
I'm Akoko Regina. I am a teacher by profession. I think I have two networks that I use, either MTN depending on the bundles or Camtel. They do have some particular bundles. So each time I subscribe using those bundles, I have my connection very easy and very fast as well. Sometimes when I recharge my phone, my mobile money account, from there I can easily subscribe to any data bundle that I want. I did participate in Mode d'Avion 237 because I'm a Cameroonian. I wanted change, so I had to be part of it. When it came up that all Cameroonians, everybody should put your phone in flight mode, I had to do it because I wanted better network connection from MTN. Internet connection should be free of charge, as long as maybe you have airtime in your phone for, let's say, maybe 2,000 francs a month. You should be eligible to have a free internet connection. I'm called Madame Sambo Claudette Nencha. I'm a guidance counselor. I use MTN and Orange. For now, I say it's easy, but at certain times we have a lot of difficulties. But the providers always assures us of maintenance, and after that, the networks are being installed. I think it's manageable. As a teacher and with children and students all around, a guidance counselor, you might be solicited at every moment. So I thought maybe at the moment I'll put my phone on mode avion. That's on flight mode. Maybe at that time my services will be needed somewhere, so I preferred to be connected. But notwithstanding, I had other colleagues who went into the flight mode and got the results from it. If they could hear me now, like any other Cameroonian, that internet should be free. It should be free for easy communication.
Those are certainly interesting suggestions from Regina and Claudette, the idea of making internet in Yaoundé free. I'm not sure if this is at all realistic in the case of Cameroon. To me, it sort of seems like one of the glaring solutions is to separate regulators from operators entirely. What do you think of this?
Olumide, I think that the issue of having free internet at the moment is very unrealistic, because first of all, the infrastructure is not there. We take, for instance, the state-owned enterprise Camtel. When you look at its network coverage, we realize that across the national territories they are not present, which even means that if the government now today decides to give free internet, a lot of people will be left behind, and that's going to increase the digital divide. Camtel is mostly in the main divisional headquarters. We have 58 divisions, so they're just mainly in the divisional headquarters. But when you go to small towns and villages, you won't have Camtel signals. So for me, the first thing is the infrastructure. We really need this infrastructure. We need the service before we start talking about having it for free. So the service is first of all not there, and the quality and even that which is there is poor. So I think what the government should do more is to make sure that we have good service. And I think this is happening because of poor regulation, and then there's really a lack of political will. I'll give an example. If we take MTN, the government says, we want you to upgrade infrastructure, we want you to expand coverage and all of that. But now you realize that MTN has had some problems recently, MTN Cameroon, because of a dispute. MTN cannot make substantial infrastructure investment at the moment because its accounts have been blocked in the country. So you see that political will is not there to really make the telecom sector to move. Because if MTN, since users have been complaining, they are the leading operator.
Right.
People have been complaining, but they can't really make investment because their accounts are blocked. And the government is not doing anything about it. Okay. It was blocked by a court, and the company says they are not involved in the dispute with the Cameroonian businessman. So that's the lack of political awareness. I also think there are multiple actors. The Telecommunication Regulatory Board really doesn't have the power. And even that which they have, they are not making good use of it to regulate. The players, you have the minister at times, the minister gives instructions to the regulator.
Hello, I think we lost you there, Aminde.
The minister gives at times instructions to the regulator,
Okay.
and then the regulator doesn't have full powers. There's a different commission that should be spectrums and all of that. And so I think at that level, there's really a problem, and the government really needs to look into that.
Kathleen, we've seen people rally against service providers, and we've heard from the people how much they really are yearning for change. There's a lot that civil society groups and citizens can do, as we saw with the fines that were later imposed on the telecoms companies. What other roles would you want to see civil society play here in this case? What does further civil society action in the fight for affordable, quality internet, what does it look like?
The truth is, realistically, what we currently have in Cameroon today, as a governance structure, is hard to see how the entire mechanism around deploying governance, it's hard to see how it's going to make significant changes, no matter how hard civil society pushes back. That's because we are in a very centralized system of governance for the last 41 years. We are also a country where, while other nations of the continent are doing things like interoperability, number portability, and things like that, we're doing more and more to stifle those sorts of extensive competition. So to harness the power of civil society and citizens by themselves is crucial. It's not as if we, can't do it. I think that we will continue to do the first and most important thing that any civil society group can do, is to continue to awaken consciousness, awareness playing a pivotal role in just letting people know what and how these affect their lives. And I'm glad we're on a show like this, because even you are playing a pivotal role in amplifying the voices of Cameroonians and informing not just Cameroonians themselves, but the world, the region, the continent about what is happening. We live in a global continent these days, and you never know what kind of pressure, external and internal, can play on issues. Additionally, we'll continue to leverage the power of digital platforms, no matter how, slow or, lacking they are. Also, policy advocacy is essential. We can collaborate to develop evidence-based research where we are highlighting socioeconomic benefits of improved internet access. Sometimes they say, show me the money gives you the money. So it's important for us to be able to influence policy decisions and engage in dialogues with policymakers and regulatory bodies. Furthermore, I feel every time I talk about holding telecom providers accountable in Cameroon, I feel bad because we know the truth and we need to tell ourselves hard truths. The truth is that the private sector telecom providers are the infrastructure builders of telecoms in this country. That's the truth. And they are the ones who, right now, Cameroon is not even in 5G, simply because the kinds of bureaucratic policy bottlenecks, that are placed in these people's pathways is hard to imagine. And as a subscriber, we get to a level where we understand these things because evidence-based advocacy is very important. So whether we like it or not, we need to put pressure where pressure needs to be put. The Ministry of Telecommunications, the regulator, the state provider, the government itself, the Minister of Communications, these are the people we need to hold accountable. These are the people we need to sit on the table and say, hey, this is how things are going to get better. This is how you're going to benefit as a country. And this is how your country is going to move forward. All we can do as subscribers with the telcos is hold them accountable to corporate best practice. That is what we can do and what we should do. Because even they, as we saw during the Bring Back Our Internet protest, even they are commanded by the guys at the top. So in conclusion, empowering civil society and citizens to advocate is important.
I see your point about holding regulators and authorities more accountable rather than pressuring civil society to go above and beyond or blaming the private sector alone. But are there ways all three sides can better work together?
We need to think about how inclusivity does not mean bringing everyone under the same umbrella for the same thing. A couple of months ago, I worked with an organization that is making it easy and affordable for people who don't have smartphones to have the benefits of digital economy on the simple phones they have in their pockets. So what we do is different from how we do what we do. In remote areas where there's no power, where literacy is an issue, where infrastructure is still a big, massive challenge, these days, you might not need to have an internet connection where they will not even afford it, no matter how cheap you make it. Some people will never afford this internet at these times we are in our country. We need to think of other ways. And so through voice power technology, an innovative tech company is bringing the benefits of digital economy to simple mobile phones, providing direct, immediate access to even hard to reach communities with real-time measurable results. So every month, millions of people use this platform for the same reason you and I browse the internet. They use it to access on-demand information, to find services nearby, or to purchase products. And this company is doing what? They are leveraging established relationships with, guess who? Telco companies to amplify tailored content to a large subscriber base of customers. And they're using voice-powered technology. Now, it's possible to reach millions that may have lower literacy in any language free of charge. So inclusivity and access must not rely on one path. We keep saying internet connection. We keep talking about internet technology inclusivity. We need to think the way the M-Pesas have thought, such that Africa has become the beacon of mobile money on the continent. So Olumide, it requires a multi-pronged approach that addresses a lot of things: infrastructure challenges, it promotes competition, it fosters a regulatory environment that encourages dynamic innovation and consumer protection. We are in Africa. We must find solutions for the needs, not wants, for what we need.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. Judith, I'm wondering what other countries have done to bring down the price of internet connections, but also to increase the quality. What lessons are out there from African countries that Cameroon can learn from?
That issue that we raised on competition, studies have shown that countries that have liberalized the platform for other service providers to come in have also experienced lower costs in terms of internet, because it seems to be that there is a linkage between monopoly and the high cost of internet in a particular country. So it's about time that there's a lot of liberalization, of course, regulated liberalization in a way, so that we can have other actors coming in. There's also a need for us to look into creating public access to internet, because the discussion today is showing us that the cost will always be high. Even when it goes down, there'll still be someone that is unable to access it.
That's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, that's why we're talking about inclusivity, the marginalized areas, or we're looking at people who can't afford it. So can governments try to extend that grace to areas or even centers that badly need the internet? Of course, we've had the question come up in this discussion of, should the internet be free? The answer mostly is that it's a little unrealistic for African countries at the moment to declare that they'll have free internet for everyone. But could now governments look at the angle of, could we have public access to internet for particular groups of people? Can it be lowered? Can it be accessible for schools, hospitals, communities, whereby it may not be every household to have its router and access to Wi-Fi, but could there be spots that they work on, and just make sure that there is a bare minimum access to internet while we wait for the day African countries can have free internet all over. In terms of legislation and policies, it's very important for us to consider the fact that the consumer protection issue is very, very important, and I'll re-echo the involvement of consumers in the regulatory processes, and just to also ensure that the channels are clear for complaints to be filed, that it is clear that we'll have a mechanism whereby the consumer is not powerless and governments are siding with these operators. So it's very important for that fairness in the system, so that there are checks and balances.
This has been a really enlightening conversation. I'd like to know what some final words you all have for Cameroonian authorities are. Kathleen, what are you thinking?
The people are going to be the ones to put the pressure to ensure that the government and any other party, takes action. So the people first need to be the bearers of action. And we do that in several ways, which I've already mentioned. One of the things I've done recently is to just unsubscribe, right? Hurt them where it hurts, right? So that, they would begin to wake up to the slumber that a lot of them have put us in this country. The people have the power, and they would make things work. That's what I think.
Thank you. Aminde, your quick message to the government.
One thing the government needs to do is to invest in infrastructure. The infrastructure we have in place is not enough. I think the government should really make huge investment in infrastructure, especially with the state-run Camtel. Another thing to which I think the regulators should do is that they should always publish a status report of the network. They actually do monitor the network quality across the country, but those reports are not published. So users don't even have access to it to know where there is connectivity, what we have, is it 2G, 3G, does the claim made by these operators, does it match with what's actually on the field? We don't have this information, and I think it's important for the regulator to do. And then one other thing too is, which the government plans to do, was the issue of interoperability of SIM cards. If we really have that in place, users will have an upper hand, in the sense that if I'm with NTM and their service is not good, I just need to dial a code and I switch to a different provider, and I'll have that power in my hand. So I think if the government can really move on with that project, it's going to be to the advantage of users. And then lastly, at the level of regulation, you realize that the MTN actually asked for a license to test the 5G since 2019, and up to now, the regulator has not given a response. So you see that the regulator is really sleeping and needs to wake up.
Judith, your advice to the Cameroonian government?
Lowering the internet costs alone will not solve the issue, because there are so many other things that complement internet accessibility beyond the cost. So it's important for them to understand that countries that have been able to break through that have worked on the infrastructure, like my colleagues have mentioned, and they've also been able to open up the market, so that there's no monopoly. And then it's also important for them to realize the essence of good policies, good regulation, in order to address all the barriers that are hindering internet accessibility. So I just want to say that beyond lowering the cost of the internet, there's greater responsibility in terms of accountability, in terms of being able to assess the quality, in terms of engagement with the people that are using these services, so that they can be able to deliver the services that are suitable for the people.
Kathleen, Judith, Aminde, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for joining me. It's been a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be on the episode.
Thank you so much for having me on this episode. So
here are some of the points that have stuck with me in this conversation. First, I am really intrigued and also a bit sad to know how poor internet services can have an impact on the economy, but also on people's lives and livelihoods and on people's minds even. As Kathleen mentioned, Cameroonians go around with 2 or 3 SIM cards ready to switch to another network at any time, never quite trusting that the service they've paid for will materialize. That doesn't seem fair to me. I want to blame the internet service providers like MTN and Fairtel and others, but as Aminde points out, there are several factors standing in the way of these guys doing their jobs properly. These companies cannot access the available fiber optic services on their own, but always have to go through the government-owned Camtel. It doesn't appear that it's a truly liberalized market if the government is a regulator and a service provider. And that's one area policymakers have to address first in order to begin solving these problems. That all links perfectly to Judith's point that actions like finding the service providers or ordering them to lower the internet costs don't address the main issue, which is the level of infrastructure that the state has provided. This is, of course, not to condone the poor practices of the service providers. But I know for sure that a company like MTN, which operates in my home country of Nigeria, can do much better if enabled. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Cameroon's internet woes and the state of internet affordability in Africa, we've collected a list of the most interesting studies and articles on our website. That is afripoly.org/podcasts. And a small announcement, the Africa Hour is taking a small production break. We want to have more episodes ready for your listening pleasure, and this break will help us to do just that. We'll be back in November, before you know it. The Africa Hour is brought to you by APRI, Africa Policy Research Institute, and is produced by Bear Radio. I am Olumide Abimbola. Our producer is Shola Lawal, with assistance from Hannah Lang in Berlin and Williams Ngashu in Yaoundé.